Jason here with another episode of the American Operator Podcast. I have with me today David Worley, who is running for the Idaho State Senate. And then I got my battle buddy here, Riley Reynolds. Riley and I have been training together in tactics, everything firearms for the last 6 years, right?
Yes.
6 years. Ever since COVID kicked off, we have a small training group that we have been training every week, right? Except for the last 6 months, our fearless leader has been deployed somewhere in the world we're not allowed to know. So anyway, that's how cool he is. But today's episode, I want to talk about the Second Amendment. David is very educated on the Second Amendment and also the militia. David is a member of the Idaho State National Guard. David, is the National Guard the militia?
So the National Guard is obviously a component of it, and it's kind of the organization that I guess you'd say is the legacy descendant of the old militias. But we should remember that, under federal code and even under Idaho code, that the militia has always been, going back to the early republic, has been the body of the people who are military age, men specifically, trained to arms, proficient or prepared to defend the country, defend their rights, and that the tradition of the armed American ready to defend his home and his freedom goes all the way back to the early republic, goes all the way back to the colonies, and stretches all the way back into antiquity, like we were talking about, to the British Commonwealth, and even to the Romans and the Greeks. So this idea of the God-given right to defend, to band together with your fellows to defend your home and your liberty, it's a reason why we call it a God-given right. It stretches back into antiquity, has been recognized by everything from the Bible to the high pagans of Greece and Rome.
Right. Yeah, so the thought that, the well-regulated militia, a lot of people think that that's regulated by the government, right? Explain what that means, well-regulated.
Yeah, so, the meaning of the Second Amendment, is kind of morphed over time, and I would argue that we've lost the original intent. But the well-regulated militia in the early republic, specifically what we were talking about, early day, it meant that every single military-age male right out the gate when the country was founded was part of a city or a county militia, and this well-regulated meant that it was proficient and capable. So, for example, there was a lot stretching all the way back to the early colonies and also to the early republic. You had, militia ordinances that required people to maintain, a musket, powder, and ball. And when they had musters, they would inspect their weaponry, and if it wasn't in good working order, they were given a citation. So this idea that regulated means that the government has control over the individual rights of a person to keep and bear arms, no, that was never the original intent of the Second Amendment. It was to ensure that we had a well-regulated militia, meaning a militia that was capable of defending the country if called upon to do so. And that's something that we kind of lost from our history. Originally our army was very small, and it was actually the state militias that provided the bulk of the armed forces in the original design. Now, again, obviously modern war has changed quite a bit. It's hard to be proficient with a tank unless you're operating on government funding. So yes, there obviously has to be some evolution to the system with modern warfare. But when it comes to your right to keep and bear arms, we should never allow the language of the Second Amendment to be twisted to create this impression that the state or the federal government, heaven forbid, has the right to control the individual's ability to defend himself and his family and his people.
Right.
So I'll just jump in here for a second, guys. This is an important thing for me, and I just recently went through an exercise, and I've got the papers out in my truck, but I went back in my genealogy.
Yeah.
And I identified every ancestor that fought in the Revolutionary War. And of the 26 that fought in the Revolutionary War, of my ancestors,
Yes.
They were 4th up to 7th great grandfathers, so they were, some of them were getting on in age, but of the 26, 24 of them were of militias in their respective counties, to speak of under the state. But what's crazy is only 2 were Continental, and I did have actually one traitor in the clan. He was an embarrassment. He went to jail for a year as a spy. Um, his descendant is actually buried over here in Oxford, so that shame on him, and I put a shame on him. But that as I look at that, I realize what those men did to fight in that Revolutionary War. I had 3 of them that went through every engagement for 7 years in their respective geographies.
Yeah.
And it documents every engagement they had. So I think everybody should be respective and looking forward to who are your ancestors. Did they fight in the militia? Are you an embarrassment to your ancestors? Are they looking down at you going, you big bunch of sissies? Get up and get doing something, right?
Yeah, and I think that this is part of the American cultural experience that, has faded. But yes, at the end of the day, so yes, we have the armed forces, we have the reserve components of the military, but unless you maintain in the populace the martial spirit, the profession of arms that's carried outside the military, that's in the hearts and minds of the people, familiarity with weapons, familiarity with hardship. I mean, these used to be things, you even go back to the founding of the Boy Scouts in 1911. One of the aims of the original Boy Scout program, which obviously has deviated far from its roots, was to restore to young men this ability to fight, to use weapons, to survive in the wilderness. And part of it was not just building character, but also making sure that we maintained in the hearts and minds of the young men of our citizens the ability to defend the country if called upon to do so. And right now, we kind of have outsourced that in a way to purely the military regular forces. But these are great skills that build character in men, build confidence, especially in the youth. And yeah, being part of a group of guys that, go out and trains and go out and have fun. I mean, I have never had a bad day at the range, especially training the youth. Getting young men to learn how to be proficient with rifles and pistols is always a blast. And I think that young men especially are shaped even by having early experiences with doing group training on how to fight, hand-to-hand combat training. Never met a young man that wasn't improved by having some sparring. So this is not just character building, but it's how you make sure you have a body of men that if we're called upon for another great war, like heaven forbid we have to go to war with China or something like that, we should always be asking ourselves, are we building a society that could fight the type of wars that our ancestors won? Could we fight and win World War II today? Questionable. But we should want to have a society where men are strong and capable and where we could have that ability if the nation required it.
I know I don't want to sleep on the ground.
Well, I think about how the militia used to run. They had their monthly musters, right? Every man from 17 to 47 back then, right? I think.
Yeah, under Virginia's code is 55.
55, even better. So, but can you imagine those men gathering? Like, we would not have the trouble that we have with the youth today because they would have men who are more capable than they are, that are teaching them, that are, they're building a camaraderie, they're building patriotism, right? It would solve every problem that we have in society today when it comes to lack of masculinity.
Yeah, I don't know
Patriotism.
not about every problem, but a lot of the major ills that we have with young men, I do think stem from, one, young men not being challenged. And there's something also unique about doing this type of training that, again, why the Boy Scouts separated this type of activity from playing, simply sports like football or basketball. Some of these skills that you learn when you're doing this type of training are lifelong skills and build lifelong confidence of a different type. I'll give you an example. So I gained my proficiency with weapons, a little bit from my father, but mostly from the military. And I had a situation just, a couple of years ago where I was driving home from work and I saw a woman on the side of the road being beaten. Her boyfriend had her down on the ground and was kicking her. I don't know later as your boyfriend, but just see this man kicking this woman on the side of the road. I pulled over and I confronted him and got him to disengage. And for a moment, it looked like he was drawing a weapon. And so I drew my concealed carry on him and detained him until the police arrived.
Wow.
my confidence that I could confront him, de-escalate, rapidly escalate, and then de-escalate again, all of that confidence to do that came from being trained and capable. But that type of training doesn't have to happen exclusively in the military and exclusively in the police forces. And we would just have a much better society if more men were capable of moving to the sound of gunfire, moving to the sound of conflict, and being able to intervene and stop criminals. And, a lot of our current crime problems would be solved if men were just more confident and capable, good men, of dealing violence if necessary to protect their loved ones and protect others.
Right.
And I think that's something that you're talking about, groups of people who train together, and it solves some of these very practical problems. And then also we see a lot of problems with young men feeling like they don't have a social network of peers that they bond with. And again, training and field training exercises, stuff like that, it builds camaraderie in a way that a lot of other activities don't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it would be amazing to see what would be happening now. I think I could be wrong. This is what our sheriff was telling us, but you actually had to be certified that you were an upstanding militia member carrying out your duties to vote.
So I would have to go look at the exact history on that, but it would not surprise me that that was a requirement, especially in the early republic or some of the colonies.
Yeah.
And this is something, again, is an old concept of republics. So you go all the way back to the Roman Republic, and there was a requirement for military service to be a full citizen, someone to fight in the Roman Republic in order to be a full participant in the republic. So again, whether or not we're going to make those type of changes or laws, I don't know. Yeah. But what I can say is that there has always been a strong connection in the history of republics of having the citizen being willing to sacrifice to protect his nation and his people. And those are virtues that are timeless, and we could always use more of them in our society.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the first time I ever saw you speak, it was just shortly after COVID, or maybe during COVID. When did you move here?
We moved back in 2020.
So it was like right during COVID. And anyway, we were seeing all the tyranny and whatnot. You were telling us about your experience in Virginia with the National Guard when they were trying to pass some anti-gun legislation. It was very heavy-handed, correct? I mean, I saw on...
Yeah, so Governor Northam was trying to pass a law in Virginia that was basically going to ban about 80% of the firearms in Virginia. Just, if you remember, Governor Northam was one of the most radical left-wing governors that's ever sat. He occupied the governor's mansion of Virginia. I mean, he was so left-wing. He was the guy who was even looking at, advocating for you would kill a baby after it was born if the abortion failed. I mean, that's how radical and debauched this guy was. But yeah, when it came to gun control, I mean, he was a full confiscation guy. He wanted to get rid of pretty much all the guns in Virginia. It was his objective.
He was Canadian.
Northam?
I'm pretty sure that's what the Canadians want anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
We're Australian, right?
yeah. But anyway, you were there with the National Guard. There was a lot of protesting, correct?
Yes. So, my deployment with the National Guard was actually to put down the Antifa and BLM protesting. But that same year, the National Guard wasn't called out for this, which I'm glad, because it was a demonstration of tens of thousands of Virginia citizens rallied in Richmond, and they came to arms as a peaceful sign of force, saying, hey, look, we are armed and we're not going to give up our guns. And I think that what people forget about these types of things is, one, this was a groundswell. I mean, this was about 40,000 people who showed up. And, unfortunately, not very many media places covered it. But we have to remember, at the end of the day, the Second Amendment has little to do with hunting. It has a little bit to do protecting yourselves from criminals. But if you go to the root of the purpose of the Second Amendment, you go to the writings of the founders, you go to the vision of men like George Washington, Jefferson, and Adams, they wanted to ensure the people had a final check on a tyrannical government. That if your government became tyrannical, that the people would never be left without the means of resisting tyranny. And so ultimately, when we talk about protecting the Second Amendment, we're not just talking about the God-given right to self-defense. We're talking about the ultimate right of the people to defend themselves from a predatory government. That's exactly what the Declaration of Independence is all about, is protecting your God-given rights from your government when it no longer does its job, which is to protect your rights, and it becomes actually the opposite, it is now trying to take them away. And that's the root of it. That's the purpose of the Second Amendment.
Right. And then it's against all levels of government, your local government, your state government, and federal government. It's just not, just against the big, mean federal government.
Yeah, and I think we saw that during COVID, where sometimes, local governments can be just as tyrannical as the federal government. State governments can be the same way. And this is, again, also have to remember with the Declaration of Independence, it's very clear. The founders even used this term that they say, the act of overthrowing your government should not be done to light and transient causes, is the phrase they use. Right. And that's important, like, no, I don't like my property taxes, time to go shoot the sheriff. No, that is absolutely not what the Second Amendment's about. But the right to keep and bear arms is about that ultimate check, where you say, we have exhausted all other options, just like we did the American Revolution. We have petitioned the king. We've asked him over and over. We've made her the legal arguments. We've written the letters. We've done the protests. We've done the boycotts. And now we can see that there is no other option but to use force to protect our rights. And so this is why the Second Amendment not only is this granting, not granting, it enshrines this God-given right in law, but it's also the sacred trust of men who know how to use force, that you use it justly and correctly. And so that's why I think, going back to civic education, using the firearm is one thing, that's one skill, but also to understand the basis of why we have the Second Amendment, so that you only use that ultimate reason for it when it's absolutely necessary.
Right. David, since I've known him, has been highly involved in local politics. And I think that's one thing where more gun owners need to get involved. You see on social media, everybody's like, oh, when are we going to start shooting them? And really, if you haven't, gone through the steps, like you said, getting involved in the politics, actually caring, you're not doing your part. That's a spit in the face of the founding fathers who laid the foundation, who gave us the system, so that we don't have to do that. Because they did. They saw what a sacrifice that was. And can you imagine today how catastrophic that would actually be? So, one of my things is, if you don't like how things are, get involved politically. I ran for sheriff 2 years ago. I'm getting ready to run another campaign. And so get involved, and, support the system, but also, be equipped and well regulated, and as a what I want to say, it is a leverage. Correct?
Yes, but to your earlier point, I think that this is something that, yes, you hear this time every once in a while from people, not as much as people would think, but yeah, sometimes people say, hey, when are we just going to kick this thing off or something like that? You go, no, wait a minute. And I found that a lot of times the people who say stuff like that, you go, do you know who your precinct committeeman is?
Right.
And do you even know who your congressman is?
Well, it's like, and second of all, most of those guys are 350 pounds plus and couldn't run to the grocery store, let alone pack a pack and gun. Yeah. Don't look at me like I'm fat, Jason. I'm not. You look great.
But this is the point, is that I think that, it's one thing to talk about the Second Amendment in its absolute purpose, resisting tyranny, but then we also back up a step and say, well, before we ever get to that point, we need to make sure that we've exhausted other options. And I'm sorry, but when I show up to, a candidate forum and there's only like 30 people there, I go, I'm sorry, man, but we are nowhere near well, we've exhausted all of the other options. Right. Because we still live in, now granted, there's parts of the country where the government is completely dysfunctional.
Yeah, completely.
But here in Idaho, we still have a functional republic where we could still vote, and we need to focus on, hey, how do we get good people in power good people who will pass just laws so that we do not have to ever use our weapons for the last line of defense of liberty. We should want to win the political battle long before that, so that we ever have to get to that point.
And thank you for doing that. Thank you for standing up and trying to do something positive, right? I mean, in his candidacy, that's what you're after.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about all the different problems we're dealing with. So, for example, you take something like, government spending and debt. You go, okay, every problem that's ignored, we will pay the bill later, but with compound interest. So you look at the mass waves of illegal immigration. At some point, you brought in so many foreigners that now your land has been transformed into a foreign place, what we see happening in places like Dearborn, Michigan. So all these problems that if we ignore them, they eventually become catastrophic. So in every regard, we should say, no, our goal should be, as if you're a patriotic American, win the political battle so that we don't get to the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And so, yes, get with your boys, get with your friends, train, have a good time, get proficient with your pistols and your rifles. But remember that before we ever get to any scenario where, heaven forbid, we have to fight a war in our own land, gosh, let's use the means that we still have available to win those political battles so we never have to do anything like that.
Yeah. Well, you were in Iraq kind of during the thick of it, right? 2005?
I went there 04, 05, and then kind of during the end of the war in 2011. So.
Right. So you've seen what war does firsthand.
Yes, and here's the thing about my military service. I'm not a war hero or anything. I did my part, and I would say I've only tasted the bitterness of war. Some guys have drank fully from the cup. But what I did see while I was there is what happens when society breaks down and you do have this, violent factionalism between different groups that are trying to use violence to impose their will on each other. And it's the last thing that you want to see in your country, which is exactly why we need to ensure that we try and win the political battles before we ever get to the point where, heaven forbid, we're dealing with a government that's completely out of control and is trying to completely strip us of our freedoms. The goal is to avoid, having to do what our forefathers did and not squander their sacrifices.
Right. Yeah, so gun guys out there, get involved in your local politics. I think Brandon Herrera just won a congressional Republican nomination in Texas. Do you know who Brandon Herrera is?
I haven't heard about
the AK guy. Oh yeah, look it up. It's an amazing story.
Okay,
yeah,
check it out.
So yeah, big YouTuber. Anyway, but he's doing the right thing. He's not just out training and doing that. He's getting involved in the process, and hopefully he can make a difference and win his election there in Texas. So anyway, I think we're good. Thank you, David, for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being involved in the political process. It's important, and that's what's going to keep this country going and keep us free. So,
sounds good.
Anyway, till next time, thank you for being here, Ryan.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. Thanks for letting me, even though it's my place.
Hey, it's a great place for podcasts. Nice to be this more often.
Thanks.
So, anyway, with that said, be safe.